The wind was a constant, biting presence, whipping dust into Alara's eyes and tearing at the thin fabric of her worn dress. The train had left her here, on the edge of nowhere, a stark, desolate landscape stretching under an indifferent sky. Fear coiled in her stomach, a cold, heavy weight. She was a stranger in a strange land, a commodity purchased sight unseen, utterly alone. The memory of the life she'd fled, the whispers, the judgment, the crushing poverty that had led her to this desperate gamble, was a ghost clinging to her heels. This place felt like the end of the world, raw and unforgiving. He stood waiting near a wagon, a tall, broad figure silhouetted against the harsh light. Caleb. His name was Caleb. He didn't smile, didn't offer a hand. His face was weathered, unreadable, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He looked as rugged and severe as the land itself. Alara's throat tightened. This was her husband, a man she'd only known through sparse, formal letters. He loaded her single, battered trunk into the wagon with strong, silent movements. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken anxieties and the vastness of the space they occupied. The ride to his place was long and jarring. The wagon wheels crunched over dry earth and rocks. The only sounds were the creak of the wood, the jangle of harness, and the ceaseless moan of the wind. Alara clutched her hands together, her knuckles white. Every bump sent a jolt through her fragile hope. She stole glances at the man beside her. He watched the horizon, his gaze steady, seemingly oblivious to her presence or discomfort. He was a man of the land, shaped by its indifference. Would he be indifferent to her too? Would he be cruel? The stories she'd heard of this life, of bought brides and lonely homesteads, rushed in, feeding her fear. His home was a small, sturdy cabin, built into the side of a low rise, offering some meager protection from the elements. It was clean, sparse, functional. A cot, a table, a wood-burning stove. Everything spoke of solitary, hard-won survival. He showed her where she would sleep, the cot. He showed her the well outside. He spoke little, his voice low and gravelly, giving brief instructions about chores, about the rhythm of the days. He didn't ask about her journey, her past, her fears. He treated her less like a wife and more like a hired hand he wasn't sure would prove useful. Alara felt a fresh wave of despair wash over her. She had traded one kind of cage for another, perhaps larger and lonelier. The silence in the cabin at night, broken only by the wind howling around the eaves, was vast and suffocating. She lay awake, listening, a small, trembling creature swallowed by the immensity of the land and the man she was bound to. Her only possession now was her fear, and it was a heavy burden to carry alone. Days blurred into a quiet, arduous routine. The work was constant and backbreaking. Fetching water, chopping wood, tending a meager garden that seemed determined to yield nothing, mending worn clothes, keeping the cabin clean. Alara pushed herself, driven by the desperate knowledge that she had nowhere else to go. Failure here meant utter ruin, a fate worse than the one she'd fled. Caleb worked from sunup to sundown, managing his small herd of cattle, repairing fences, battling the land itself. He remained a man of few words. He provided food, shelter, and safety from external threats, but offered no conversation, no comfort, no glimpse into his inner world. He was a mountain, solid and unmoving, and she was a small bird trying to find purchase on its sheer face. Alara watched him when he didn't know she was looking. She saw the quiet strength in his movements, the way his hands, rough and calloused, could be surprisingly gentle with a lame calf. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes at the end of a long day, the way he looked at the sky, reading the weather in ways she couldn't yet understand. He wasn't unkind. He wasn't cruel. He was simply solitary, used to being alone. He ate his meals in silence, acknowledged her presence with a nod, but offered nothing more. And slowly, subtly, Alara's sharp fear began to dull. It was replaced by a weary resignation, but also by a hesitant curiosity. Who was this silent man? What had brought him to this desolate place? One evening, a sudden, fierce dust storm blew in, rattling the cabin and threatening to tear the roof off. Alara, startled by the violence of it, stumbled back from the window. Caleb was already by the door, bracing it, his face grim. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. His presence was a solid anchor in the chaos. Later, after the worst had passed, and the cabin was filled with the eerie quiet that follows a storm, Alara found him sitting by the dying fire, staring into the embers. His guard seemed to be slightly lowered. He looked less like a mountain and more like a man carrying a heavy weight. In that moment, Alara saw not a potential threat, but a shared loneliness. She poured him a cup of the weak coffee she'd brewed and placed it silently beside him. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers for a brief instant. There was a flicker there, something unreadable, before he nodded his thanks. It wasn't much, but it was more than any word they had exchanged. It was a tiny crack in the wall between them, a fragile bridge built of shared hardship and unspoken observation. Alara realized she was no longer just watching him out of fear, but out of a tentative, dawning understanding. This shared existence, born of desperation, was slowly forging an unexpected, quiet connection. Winter arrived early, a brutal, unforgiving blanket of white that isolated them completely. The work changed, focusing on survival, keeping the stove fed, rationing supplies, tending to the animals huddled in the lean-to. The harshness of the season became another shared adversary, pushing them closer, not through choice, but necessity. Alara found a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. The relentless demands of the environment stripped away the remnants of her old life, the social anxieties, the fear of judgment. Here, only practical skills and resilience mattered. She learned to coax fire from damp wood, to identify animal tracks in the snow, to mend their tools with clumsy but determined hands. She stopped being the bought bride and started simply being existing, surviving. Caleb watched her transformation with that same quiet intensity. He saw her determination, her refusal to break under the strain. He saw her small acts of care, mending his worn coat without being asked, ensuring he had warm food after a long day outside. He didn't comment, but his silence began to feel less like indifference and more like a watchful respect. One afternoon, checking the fence line, he came across her struggling with a stubborn, frozen gate. Before she could ask, he was there, his strong hands taking over, working the ice-bound latch loose. He didn't linger, just completed the task and moved on. But the simple act resonated deeply. It was protection without patronage, partnership without words. Alara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, something more than the stove fire. The true test came with the wolves. A pack, emboldened by hunger, began circling the cabin, their howls cutting through the night like ice shards. Fear, the old familiar companion, returned, but it was different this time. Not the paralyzing terror of helplessness, but a fierce, protective instinct for the life she was building, for the small, quiet world she now shared. Caleb spent nights outside, guarding the animals, the rifle a stark silhouette in the moonlight. Alara stayed inside, vigilant, keeping the fire high, loading his spare rifle when he came in to warm his hands. The night of the attack was a blur of snarls, gunshots, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Alara stood by the window, a lamp in her hand, ready to shine it where needed, her heart pounding against her ribs. When it was over, as the first gray light of dawn painted the snow, Caleb came back into the cabin, his face streaked with grime and exhaustion, but his eyes clear. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time without reservation. He saw the lamp still in her hand, the determination etched on her face, the quiet courage that had replaced the fear he had first seen. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Instead, he simply nodded, a slow, deep nod of acknowledgement and respect. "You did good," he said, his voice rough. Those 3 words, simple and understated, were a foundation, a promise, a recognition of something real that had grown between them in the desolate quiet. The external threat had forced their shared reality into sharp focus, revealing not just a bought bride and a solitary man, but 2 people forging a fragile, powerful alliance against the indifference of the world. The spring arrived slowly, thawing the land, revealing the stark beauty beneath the snow. The shared ordeal of winter, culminating in the tense night with the wolves, had irrevocably shifted something between Alara and Caleb. The silence was still present, but it was no longer empty or awkward. It was comfortable, companionable, filled with the quiet understanding that comes from facing hardship together. They worked side by side, planting the new season's garden, repairing the wolf-damaged fence, their movements economical and in sync. There were still few words, but glances held meaning, and small gestures spoke volumes. He made sure her tools were sharp. She ensured his canteen was full. They were partners now, forged in the crucible of survival. Alara no longer saw a cage when she looked at the horizon, but a world they were claiming together, piece by painstaking piece. Her past felt distant, the whispers and judgments fading against the vast, clean expanse of the sky. She had found a strength within herself she had never known existed, a resilience born of necessity and nurtured by the quiet dignity of their shared struggle. And in Caleb, she saw not just the stoic, silent man who had bought her, but a man who had offered her space to breathe, to rebuild, to simply be. He had not demanded or judged or tried to change her. He had simply existed alongside her, providing a quiet constancy that allowed her own strength to flourish. One evening, as the sun dipped below the prairie, painting the sky in fiery hues, they sat outside the cabin, the air cool and clean. It was the first time they had simply sat together, not working, not eating. The silence stretched, not with tension, but with peace. Caleb stirred, turning to look at her. His gaze was steady, open in a way she had never seen before. "This life," he said, his voice soft, a rare sound. "It ain't easy." Alara met his eyes, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He looked back at the horizon, then back at her. "But it's ours now." In that simple statement was everything. The acknowledgement of the hardship, yes, but also the quiet claim of ownership, of partnership. It was not the declaration of love she had once, in girlish dreams, imagined a marriage might hold, but it was something far more profound and durable. It was the foundation of a life built on mutual respect, shared resilience, and the quiet grace they had found in each other amidst the desolation. Alara's heart felt light, freer than it had in years. She had come here seeking refuge, a last resort against a life of scorn and poverty. She had found a harsh world, a silent man, and in facing it all, she had found herself. And in the quiet strength beside her, she had found the courage to hope, to believe that even in this unforgiving land, a life of dignity, connection, and quiet grace was not just possible, but was already beginning to bloom. The bought bride had found her footing, and in doing so, had shown the solitary man the possibility of a shared dawn.